If you've been following the video game collectibles scene, or even some of my older videos about collectibles, you're probably familiar with an old company from the late 90s and early 2000s called ToySite. This was a spin-off branch of a larger parent company called BDNA, who are famous for releasing their Nintendo collectibles line of products, including the Nintendo beanbags and Zelda figures. However, for as well known and liked as BDNA's products have become over the years, you could make the argument that ToySite has become even more well known, but not for the stuff that they did release, and rather, the stuff that they never released. ToySite's popularity comes from Toy Fair 2000, where they had 3 collections of figures that were shown off and planned to come out. These included Mario's World, Zelda Ocarina of Time, and Donkey Kong 64, all with extensive character choices, accessories, and packaging that can be seen in these photos. And over all the years that these pictures circulated, it left collectors wondering where they could get their hands on the figures. But like I mentioned before, you can't get these figures because they never came out, and to this day, it's one of the most iconic series of cancelled figures to ever exist. People still mourn the loss of these toys. And what's even more interesting about their legacy is that there are still so many mysteries surrounding them, both in production and their physical whereabouts. Over the years, there has been very little information about their fate and material outside of these photos having resurfaced. Nightram from the Video Game Memorabilia Museum is one of the only people to own ToySite prototypes, having bought his collection from an eBay auction in the early 2000s. And in the years following that, a 2010 picture resurfaced of a boxed Zelda figure that sold on eBay after having been found at a thrift store. But really, this is all we sorta knew about ToySite and their products in general. No one else was really looking for them, and information was very hard to find. But with the rise of lost media and interest in doing research into items like this, it's gotten more interest and discussion about ToySite to have people look further into the company and uncover more content that is possibly out there. One of these more recent finds was a look at their old website, which never really had much work done on it in the first place, but once discovered, did reveal the existence of a planned Smash Bros. Figure set, which turns out had one photograph of it shown in a magazine that most people had never come across before. There was also the Deku-Link plush that resurfaced a couple years ago and was only spotted and identified because of the community's growing knowledge about ToySite itself. And I've actually had 1 or 2 outings with ToySite before, having done extensive research on the company years ago, and came across a couple employees during that time who were at the company during the development of their figure lines. I wanted to get more answers on the cancellation of these figures and any new information about the prototypes that I could. But even though I eventually did get in contact with these employees, it largely ended up going nowhere. And for years I felt like I was running in circles. Even before my searches, I always wanted to do a bigger video about ToySite, and it's been a fan favorite request for years, but I never felt like I had enough content to give it a proper video, until today. By chance, fellow collector and veteran of the Video Game Memorabilia Museum, Ikana, messaged me and mentioned that she had unearthed a whole collection of ToySite content from someone who worked at the company, and that there was so much of it, she didn't even know how to tell me about it all at once. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect with this collection when she sent it over, since I hadn't really talked to Ikana about ToySite before. I wasn't sure if we were even on the same page about what was new and what wasn't. Specifically, I recalled coming across some aggressive-looking concept artwork for the Mario's World figure line, and also some harder-to-find magazine scans of earlier sculpts from the Zelda Ocarina of Time line. What else could be in this new archive she found? Well, let me tell you that when I opened the first collection of pictures, yes, the first collection out of several photo sets, I literally exclaimed, "Oh my gosh," to myself out loud, even though no one else was even in the same room. I was so blown away with what I saw, it took me by complete surprise. Even if any of those older contacts I had reached out to had anything to share, I'm sure it would have only been a couple of pieces and nothing like this. This was almost the whole history of ToySite in one collection. I kinda organized these photos by series and categories, so that's the order we'll take a look at them in, beginning with Mario's World and the general Nintendo license. Let's start with a nice little appetizer and work our way up, beginning with that aggressive concept art of the main Mario's World figures that already exists online. While these pictures are not anything new, they do appear in the collection of photos in a completely different way. It looks like the artwork was placed onto a sales document that maybe would have been part of a catalog, and contains a write-up about the character at the top, its action features in the middle, and details about articulation at the bottom. Let's take a closer look at a few of them, beginning with Bowser, who is one of the funniest to read. His description says, "In the games, Bowser is able to shoot fire from his mouth. Since this is not something we want children to do, we were having the figure spray water to simulate fire." This worked with Bowser's back acting as the water collecting reservoir by placing the character's head underwater and then squeezing his back. Once above the water, press the back again to have him spray it out. It also mentioned that the figure will have articulation at the neck, shoulders, and hips, similar to other figures. What I really like about these pieces is we can actually see how the action features were intended to operate, with these extensive drawings and descriptions, unlike the Toy Fair photos that leave that detail unclear. Yoshi's page, for example, illustrates how his egg throwing feature will work, mentioning that Yoshi will be sculpted at a tilt to give his pose some motion, and so that kids will have an easier time using his feature. He comes with 2 eggs, one is placed in his hand at a time. Simply pull his hand back and let it go to launch the egg, but make sure to stay out of his way. Some of these designs even differ from the physical products that were shown at Toy Fair, like Wario's page, which mentions that his dragon hat is not removable. However, at Toy Fair, he was sculpted with his main hat on, and the dragon hat was a separate piece. It also details the missile launching feature, which is activated by pressing down on the end of the missile. What's interesting going back to the Toy Fair photos is how each character is posed with Mario Party blocks, but neither of these items appear in any of the design sheets here, so maybe that was an accessory that came later on. Banjo and Metal Mario are still designated as deluxe figures though, which was a known fact for many years, as was their action features. Metal Mario acts similar to Bowser, but uses a pump to hold water instead of a spot on his body, and Banjo has that double arm slamming action, with Kazooie being able to flap her wings. We know that neither of these action features were ever implemented into the prototype, as seen in NightRam's video showing the figure. Interestingly, it also mentions that this is the first time the 2 characters are together as action figures, with the only Banjo figure previous to this one being the Diddy Kong Racing one by Toy Biz, which did not include Kazooie. Interestingly, there is no page for the regular Mario included in this collection. But Mario's world is not all there is to see here, as there's a lot more when it comes to Mario, and specifically, cancelled products that never came out and nobody has ever seen. Firstly, with the Super Balls. These are bouncy balls that have little characters inside of them, but none of them came out, and it's not clear if these would have used minifigures inside of them, similar to the Hasbro Pokemon ones, or only 2D artwork. The character choices are on brand though, with those classic Nintendo 64 character picks like Banjo and Fox, that were so prevalent to the ToySite era of merchandise. Secondly, is a series of pewter figures cast in silver, with 2 sheets that show Mario characters as well as Perfect Dark. As far as we know, this is the only Perfect Dark related piece of merchandise that ToySite was ever planning to make, though neither of these series came out. In fact, the Mario sheet even reuses the Bowser figure artwork from Mario's world, so this must have been very early on in development. There's also a sheet that details some Mario sports sets, like golf and basketball, which describes the equipment each set was going to come with and how they would be designed. At this point, there wasn't even an official Mario basketball game that existed, so it's interesting what they would have come up with for artwork had this one been released. And finally is my favorite part of the Mario section, which details some unreleased candy dispensers called candy catchers. ToySite actually did release a few of these with the Pokemon license, but none of the Nintendo ones ever came out. There exist 2 different sheets that show the characters planned, with newly drawn artwork. The original concept contains Banjo and Mumbo, but they were eventually replaced with Donkey Kong in a later revision. Each one of these characters has standalone artwork as well, which really shows the detail close up along with the candy catcher model itself. However, unlike the rest of the unannounced products that never even got prototypes, the candy catchers did. These are physical prototypes that were made from the design sheets and have never been seen before. While every character has the same colored dispenser, which differs from the artwork, the characters themselves do match the designs very closely, though some minor details like Bowser's spiked collars are missing from the figure. I love the way these look and wish they had come out, though unfortunately, the Banjo and Mumbo ones are not here, so it's likely prototypes were never made for them once Donkey Kong came around. But I never would have thought these existed at all, because they were never announced, never mentioned by anybody, and no one had seen them before. Moving on to the next category is none other than Super Smash Bros., which is a huge surprise in itself because I didn't think I'd ever come across enough content from this line that would allow me to make an entire segment in a video. Like I mentioned before, there only exists a listing that mentioned the figures on their website and one photo showing some figures from Toy Fair. But let me tell you, there's so much more content to unearth. Firstly, by going back to the website listing, it says that the figures were going to be released in 2 packs, with each character versing one another, and that every one of the main 8 characters from the game would be in the line. In this collection of design sheets, concept art for every character with a colored front view and side view without arms can be seen. I love looking at this artwork. It's so accurate to the Smash Bros. Brand, with everyone looking angry and ready to fight, especially Kirby, who looks really out of character. There are a couple interesting notes written out on these sheets as well, with Mario having articulation at the arms and neck, Donkey Kong having articulation at the shoulders, and Yoshi's sculpt mentioning a slight furrow in the brow to show anger. There's also a lineup sheet that shows every character in scale with one another, and it gets even more in-depth than that, with these sheets that really get down to the measurements and features to consider during actual production. Specifically, the attach point for Link's sword sheath points out that it must be strong enough to handle abuse, probably from the kids who will be slamming these together as they fight with them. Which brings us back to the photo from Toy Fair, showing Mario, Donkey Kong, and Yoshi together with a boxing ring. One of the intended play features of this series was to fight with the characters in the boxing ring, though back then, we were never completely sure if this ring went to the Smash Bros. Line or was just reused and came from something else. But now we have confirmation that it does officially go with Smash Bros. A drawing of the ring appears in a sheet that displays the breakdown of each figure part and how they're going to be manufactured. I think even compared to the extensive Mario's World sheets with the descriptions of how the toys are going to work, these tell an even bigger story for the fact that we get such a close look at the way ToySite intended to produce these. Knowledge that most people would never know or come across at all. All the joints, all the plates, all the details that go into creating figures in the first place. Though with all of this detail, it makes me wonder what exactly the Toy Fair prototypes were made with, because the articulation and sculpts themselves don't look quite the same as the model sheets. It almost looks like they may have changed the material to a bendy soft plastic and not a hard plastic with articulation, for the fact that kids will be slamming these together. But it's too hard to tell from this one photo what the prototypes are made out of, though Yoshi isn't even cast in green like he appears in the artwork. Unfortunately, there were no other physical figures in this collection, so unless the other ones were made and got separated from this content, it seems like the ring and these 3 were the only ones that ever existed. Finally, there exists a little mock-up box containing the Pikachu and Donkey Kong figure showing how they were going to be packaged together, which is the same character combo that was listed on the website. While I really hope we can see more of the physical figures at some point if they exist, it's still really incredible to have this content archived and detailed as an artifact from ToySite's past, and from a figure line that will likely never exist in the same way again. And now it's time to look at one of the most coveted ToySite figure series that was ever planned to be made, and that's Zelda Ocarina of Time. I'm not sure which of the two, Ocarina of Time or Mario's World, has become the most desired, but the Zelda series for sure has a lot of extra eyes on it when it comes to Zelda-specific collectors that would love to get their hands on these prototypes. And in the collection of documents from Icona, there is certainly a lot of unbelievable content that makes me hopeful that maybe, someday, more of these figures will show up. But for now, we do have even more insight about them from a design standpoint that nobody had known about before. Beginning in a way similar to Mario's World are design sheets that show the figures in those sales documents, though unlike Mario's World, they use pictures of the physical figures and not concept art. Each character's action feature is also described in 1 or 2 lines, unlike Mario's World where there was more text and descriptions that told you what each one did exactly. But that's not a problem though, because there exists a separate sheet that lists each character and, in great detail, describes how you can play with them. Most of these I had never even heard about before, like Link having a dual mechanism, allowing for his sword and shield to be raised depending on which way he's twisted, and young Link having an elaborate slingshot mechanic to battle the Skulltula, which in itself could hang from surfaces like in the game. As for the pictures of the figures used in these sheets, I think some of them might have been available online individually before, but a couple like Zelda and Stalfos I don't remember seeing at all. It's possible there were different promotional photos taken of them and were circulated, because this line actually went through a long development that changed over time. The first iteration of this line was shown off in Tomart Action Figure Digest in April 1999, with sculpts that looked slightly different than the final ones they ended up going with, and it was during this early period when Phantom Ganon was just artwork and Young Link didn't exist at all. Then, later on in 1999, the line was reworked with the more updated sculpts that we're familiar with, and the addition of Phantom Ganon and Young Link were officially added. In this rollout chart, notice that the majority of the line was supposed to be released in September 1999, with Phantom Ganon and Young Link being deluxe figures scheduled to release in October 1999. But as we know, the series would miss this deadline and, once again, be shown off at Toy Fair 2000, which is where all those famous pictures came from before it was eventually cancelled shortly after. But it was during this development, between the original sculpts and the final Toy Fair pictures, where a missing link was discovered to exist, connecting these early and late iterations to one another. Included in the photo set are a series of pictures showing the existence of boxed figures. However, they don't use the final boxes from Toy Fair, and rather, the original cardboard backing from BDNA's earlier Zelda line, which did release. I had no idea this middle iteration of the figures ever existed, and once again, we're seeing them for the first time. Honestly, I kinda love this more simplistic style of packaging for the line, and getting to see the figures from yet another angle is also very interesting. What's even more curious is it seems as though the packaging layout in the plastic bubble is the same as what ended up being chosen as the final one for the Toy Fair display, so that much did stay the same. But unfortunately, as has been the case for every other section in this video, there were no physical prototypes included in the collection of documents. These are old photos, so they're either still out there somewhere or were destroyed long ago. But this does mean that there are at least 4 sets of Ocarina of Time figures that exist. The original sculpts from April 1999, the revised sculpts with the BDNA style packaging, the final iteration with the new box art from 2000, and then the loose set of figures that were on display with the boxed ones at Toy Fair. Every character has at least 4 copies that were made, and it's for that reason I'm hopeful that more of them could have survived. In addition to the physical figures, are a series of production pieces similar to the Smash Bros. Line that showcased how each figure was going to be constructed and designed, along with notes about how the kids are going to play with them. It's really like a piece of art just looking at these setups, and it really makes me wish we had these figures even more than I had before. To think that all this work never quite materialized in the way it was intended is very unfortunate, but that's not all of the ToySite Zelda products that never came out. Similar to the Mario and Perfect Dark Pewter figures, they had plans to make a series for Zelda as well, with a much more extensive series of concept art having been made, with some iconic scenes being chosen for the figures too. Even a packaging mock-up for this one exists, showing a tube with some nice artwork in the back and the figure inside. Dog tags were also planned but never released either, though ToySite did release Pokemon ones in this style. And finally is a display mock-up that shows what a retail setup containing Zelda-themed products would look like, with notes that describe where the figures go, along with CDs, books, and games. There's a spot for items listed as Link and Ganon figure, along with the 3-pack of figures, all of which released. I wonder if this is actually a mock-up for BDNA rather than ToySite, but it must have gone unused because I've never seen this kind of physical display before. Even though we'll never get to experience these ToySite figures as they were originally intended to be released, it's always amazing being able to find new content like this that adds to the ToySite legacy, and can be documented for toy history as well. It's pretty unbelievable that none of this artwork was thrown away over the years either. It could be some of the only records of this stuff that have survived, especially since it was made so long ago, and at a time when fewer people cared about this kind of thing in the first place. In fact, at this point in the video, you might be asking yourself, if so many people loved these figures and BDNA had successfully released products before, why make the decision to cancel everything? Well, over the years, a statement has been passed around in the community that mentioned BDNA lost faith in the toy industry and closed ToySite completely as a way to leave the market. But now we have a little more insight from the person behind these photos as to why nothing came out from these lines. It wasn't just a matter of BDNA wanting out of the industry, but they reached that decision on behalf of the retailers. It was mentioned by the source that these product lines did not resonate well with retailers, and there was very little interest from them to even carry the lines. As a result of this low interest, it left BDNA to conclude that there would be too much financial risk in producing the toys at all. From that point on, ToySite continued to release plushes without any support for these figure lines until the license ran out, and that was it. I really hope that someday we're able to find more of the physical figures, because that would be the next piece of content that would be great to archive. And like I said before, there were no physical items within any of this content, but that just gives us something else to search for in our effort to save ToySite from becoming lost media in an era where preservation is so important. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other lost media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.